I took the night cleaning job partly because I liked being the only person awake in a building full of sleeping ones, and partly because it was the hospital where I was born, and I thought that ought to feel like something. It didn't at first. That's the honest part. I want to start honest, because everything that came after made me lie to people, small lies, the kind you tell so they'll stop looking at your face, and I'd rather not do that here. When I walked in for my first shift, the hospital where I was born felt like any other building that had outlived its own architecture. Wrong-colored linoleum laid over older, better linoleum. A lobby that had been renovated to look calming and only managed to look forgettable. A vending machine humming to itself in a corner like a man who has given up on being spoken to. I stood in that lobby at 10 at night with my new lanyard still warm from the laminator, and I felt nothing, and I was almost relieved. I had come there hoping not to feel things. That was the whole arrangement I'd made with my life that year. I was 28. I should put that down too, because later it matters in ways I didn't understand yet. 28, and I had spent the previous year and some change taking care of my mother, which is a sentence people nod at without hearing. They picture something gentle, tea and blankets. They don't picture the arithmetic of it, the way a year of that quietly subtracts you from every other part of your life, until there's a version of you left that only knows how to listen for breathing in the next room. My friends had drifted, not unkindly, the way water finds the lower ground. My apartment had become a place I went to be unconscious in. I'd stopped being a person with a future and become a person with a schedule, and when the worst of it eased, when my mother stabilized into something that wasn't recovery but wasn't the other thing either, and went to a place with nurses who weren't me, I found I had no idea how to be awake during the day anymore. Daylight had people in it. Daylight expected things. Daylight kept asking me how I was doing, and I had run out of ways to answer. So a night job made sense. And a night job in a building that was mostly empty made more sense than that. I'd seen the listing and felt something almost like appetite, which I hadn't felt in months. To be the one awake while everyone else slept, that felt safe in a way I couldn't have explained to the woman who hired me. A tired supervisor named Dolers who looked at my resume for exactly as long as it took to confirm I had hands. To move through a place where everyone had surrendered their watchfulness and handed it, briefly, to me. I wouldn't have to perform being fine. The sleeping don't ask. You can carry whatever you're carrying right past them, and they won't even turn their heads. The work itself I learned fast, because it was meant to be learned fast. That's the design of it. You are not supposed to think while you do it. You are supposed to become a part of the building's own slow metabolism. There's a cart, and the cart has a rhythm, and you learn the rhythm, and then the rhythm has you. Wet mop, then the long-handled squeegee, then the buffer if it's a buffer night, the big machine that turns the floor to a black mirror under the half-lit corridors. I learned the smell first, the way you always learn a place by its smell before you trust your eyes in it. Floor wax and the particular ghost of antiseptic that hospitals never fully lose. No matter how empty the ward, a cold green smell, clean in a way that isn't comforting, clean the way a held breath is clean. Under that, on the patient floors, the warmer human smells the cleaning was meant to erase, and never quite did. I came to find I could read a corridor by smell alone. I came to find I liked it. And the sound. People think a hospital at night is quiet, and it isn't. Not really. It's that the loudness changes register. The daytime noise, the carts and pages and conversations, all of that drains away, and what's left underneath is the building's own voice, which you can only hear once the people stop talking over it. The hum. Everywhere, the hum, like the whole structure, is an instrument someone is holding a single low note on, air pushing through ducts. The deep tidal sound of pipes somewhere below me carrying water to rooms I'd never see. Far off, an elevator arriving at a floor no one had called it to. And the corridors themselves had a sound, or rather a way of holding sound, that I can only call a held breath. You'd push the cart through a stretch of dim hallway and feel the air thicken with a tension, as though the corridor had noticed you and decided, for now, to let you pass. I'm not being dramatic. Ask anyone who's worked nights in a big old building. They'll tell you the hallways watch. They just won't tell you while they're standing in one. The other thing about the nights was the people who weren't asleep. There weren't many of us. A skeleton crew of nurses up on the patient floors, moving softly, their voices dropped to that flat, low murmur people use over the heads of the sleeping. A security guard or two. And the rest of the cleaning crew, who I rarely saw, because the building was big and we each had our territory, and the whole point of the job was that you didn't cluster. We were spread thin through the dark like the last few embers banked in a grate. I liked that, too. I liked passing another cart in a far hallway and lifting a hand and not having to speak. We were a kind of company that asked nothing. For the first weeks, it was exactly what I'd wanted. I was the one awake. I was the one carrying the watchfulness for everyone. And nobody asked me how I was doing because the floors don't ask, and the hum doesn't ask, and the embers in the dark only nod. I noticed the elevator in my second week, which is later than you'd think. But I'd been taking the stairs mostly, because the stairs were on my route and the elevator wasn't. And because there is something about being alone in an elevator at 3 in the morning that even I, who had signed up for solitude, found to be a little much. But one night my knee was bad, and my cart was heavy, and I rode up from the basement. And I stood there in that small, bright box with my reflection doubled in the steel. And I looked at the panel the way you look at anything when you're too tired to look away from it. And I saw that the numbers went 1, 2, 3, 5. No 4. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, alone in the elevator, a short, ugly sound that startled me. Because, of course, the missing 13th floor, the superstition older than the building, hotels and offices all over the world quietly pretending a number out of existence so that nobody has to push a button they don't like the feel of. I'd been in a dozen buildings that skipped 13. I'd never seen one skip 4, but I'd read somewhere that in some places 4 is the unlucky one, the number that sounds like another word, the word you don't say in a building full of the sick. So that was that. A bit of borrowed superstition, poured into the concrete decades ago. I rode up to 5, and I cleaned 5, and I didn't think about it again for 2 more nights. Except I did think about it. That's the thing about a thing like that. It doesn't ask to be thought about. It just sits in a low corner of you and waits. 2 nights later, I was on 3, buffing the long corridor that ran the length of the wing, and I straightened up to rest my back, and I looked up at the ceiling, and I thought, with no drama at all, the way you'd remember where you left your keys. The maternity ward was on 4. I knew it the way you know things you were told as a child and never examined. My mother had told me. She'd been here on the 4th floor 28 years before, and she'd held me on the 4th floor, and the 4th floor was where I had started. And the building had decided, somewhere along the way, to stop counting it. I want to be careful here, because this is the place where, if I'm not careful, I'll make it sound like I went looking for something. I didn't. I went looking for the ordinary explanation, the way you do, because the ordinary explanation is a kind of blanket, and I wanted to pull it over myself and go back to my quiet, undemanding nights. So the next time I crossed paths with Emile, I asked him. Emile was the closest thing the night had to an elder. He'd been a janitor in that building for longer than I'd been alive, somewhere past 30 years. And he'd shifted, with age, into a softer role that was half maintenance and half just being there. A man who knew where every shut-off valve was and which doors stuck in the damp. He had a face like a folded paper bag and hands that had stopped being able to fully open. And he drank his coffee at a little metal table in the loading dock at around 2 every morning. And if you wanted to, you could sit with him, and he'd talk, and you could let it wash over you. I started sitting with him sometimes. He never once asked me why a woman my age was cleaning floors at night. I think he knew the night was full of people who'd rather not be asked. I asked him about the elevator. I said it lightly, the way you'd mention the weather. The buttons skip 4, I said. What's on 4? And here is the thing I keep coming back to, the small wrongness that I felt before I could name it. He smiled. Not the way you smile at a stupid question, and not the way you smile at a sad story you've told too many times. A hospital this old, an old man this long inside it, he'd have sad stories worn smooth as river stones, and this wasn't that smile. He smiled the way you smile when someone mentions a place you used to love. A warmth came up into his folded face, into his clouded eyes, and for a second he wasn't looking at me at all. He was looking at 4, somewhere up and behind me through 3 floors of concrete. Old maternity ward, he said, long time ago. There was a flood burst main up on the roof, came down through the whole stack on that side, soaked 4 right through. By the time they got it pumped out, the mold was already in the walls, the black kind, the kind you can't ever really get back out of an old plaster building. So they sealed it. Moved maternity across town, to the new place on Havorson, and they shut 4 up and stopped sending the elevator there, because there was no reason to send it anywhere a person couldn't go. It was a complete answer. It was a good answer. It had a burst main in it and black mold and a sensible municipal decision, and every part of it was the kind of dull, true thing that buildings are full of. And I would have taken it, blanket and all, except that I am, to my own continuing misfortune, someone who listens to how a thing is said, and not only to what it says. A habit I learned across a year of listening to my mother tell me she was fine. And the way Emile said it didn't match the words. The words were about ruin and mold and abandonment, but the warmth never left his face. He talked about that sealed, ruined, mold-eaten floor the way you talk about a house you grew up in and had to leave, the way you talk about something you miss. And when he finished, he looked down into his coffee and said, almost to himself, in a lower voice, that they kept the heat on up there. For the pipes, he said, so they don't freeze and burst again. He said it the way you'd explain a kindness. I didn't push it. You don't push Emile. He just goes quiet and soft like a snail touched on the horn. But I did the arithmetic later on my cart, the way I do arithmetic on everything now. Maternity moved to the new place on Havorson. I knew that building. Everyone in town did. And I was fairly sure the place on Havorson had opened recently, within the last few years. Which left a gap, didn't it, between when 4 supposedly flooded and went dark, and when there was anywhere else in this city for a child to be born. A gap of years where, by Emile's story, no babies had been born in this town at all. That couldn't be right. Stories like that have gaps in them the way old floors have soft boards, and you don't notice until you put your weight down. I should have let it go. I want that on the record. I had a quiet job and a quiet night and a bank timber solitude that was, for the first time in a year, almost healing me. But I found, over the next few shifts, that my route kept bending. I'd be cleaning 3 and I'd find myself at the stairwell door. Not the public stairs, the back ones, the fire stairs that ran the full height of the building, gray-painted steel and bare bulbs. The part of a building no one decorates because no one is meant to linger there. I'd push through onto the landing for 3, and there above me would be the half-flight turning up into the dark toward 4, and I'd stand there with my hand on the cold rail and look up at it. And then I'd go back to my floor and feel faintly ashamed of myself, the way you feel when you catch yourself driving past someone's house. The fire stairs were the thing the ceiling up had forgotten, or hadn't been able to fully manage. You can wall off an elevator. You can pull a number off a panel. But a fire stair has to go everywhere by law. You cannot seal a floor away from its own escape route. Not really. Not without inspectors and paperwork, and a kind of attention nobody wanted to pay to a dead ward. So the stairs still went to 4. And one night, I'd known I would, I think. From the first time I stood on that landing, I went up. It was nothing. I want to say that because it's true, and because it makes what happened next land the way it landed for me. The half-flight up to 4 was the same gray steel as every other flight. The bulb on that landing was out, so I climbed the last few steps into a soft dark, and at the top there was a door, a heavy fire door, gray-painted steel like all the rest, and on it, stenciled in white paint on the cream color old white paint goes, was a number. 4, just that. The number they'd erased from the elevator was still standing here in the dark on its own door, patient, uncorrected, because nobody comes to the fire stairs to be reassured. I don't know why I touched it. I've turned that over a great many times since, and I can't give you a reason that would satisfy you, because it didn't satisfy me. I think I expected it to be cold. Everything in a fire stair is cold. The rail had been cold under my hand the whole way up. The air had that gray chill that unheated concrete holds even in summer. I think I wanted to lay my palm against the cold of it and feel the deadness Emile had described, the flooded, ruined nothing, and let that be the end of the bending of my root. I think I went up there to be cured. The door was warm. Not hot. I want to be exact because the exactness is the whole horror of it, or the whole tenderness. I still can't choose which word. Not hot, not the warmth of a fire on the other side, nothing that would make you pull your hand back. It was the warmth of something living. It was the warmth a mattress holds for a minute after someone gets up from it. It was the warmth of the inside of a wrist, of a palm held out for yours, of a forehead you put your lips to check for fever. Body temperature, near enough. The gray steel door at the top of the dead, cold, sealed, mold-eaten fourth floor was the temperature of a person. And I stood there in the dark with my whole hand flat against it, and felt it give that warmth up into me, steady and unhurried, like it had all the time in the world and had been keeping itself ready. And I thought, with the strange flatness that real fear comes in, of a thing my mother used to say. She didn't say it often, and never as a complaint. She said it the way you'd mention an old debt long since forgiven, with a kind of soft wonder. When I was born, she'd say, they almost didn't keep you. That was the phrasing. Not we almost lost you. Not you almost didn't make it. They almost didn't keep you. As though, on the fourth floor of this hospital 28 years ago, there had been a question of keeping, and a hand that had decided, and the decision had been close. I left my hand on the door longer than I should have. I know that now. At the time, it didn't feel like a length of time at all. It felt like a held note, like the building's hum had narrowed down to that one warm rectangle under my palm. And then, and I'll only say this once, because saying it more makes it sound like I want you to believe it, and I don't need you to believe it, I only need you to know it's what happened. I felt something on the other side go still. Not a sound stopping, there'd been no sound. A stillness arriving. The particular stillness a room takes on when someone in it stops moving to listen. The stillness of being heard back. I took my hand off the door, and the cold of the stairwell came back into my fingers all at once. And I stood in the dark a moment longer with my heart doing something slow and enormous. And then I went back down to 3, where the floor was still wet and waiting. And I did not finish my route that night anywhere near as well as I should have. For a while, I let the explanations do their work, the way you let a song play to the end even after you've stopped liking it. The flood, the mold, the move across town. I'd repeat them to myself on the cart, the 3 of them in order, the way you'd thumb a rosary you no longer believed in but still found comforting to hold. And for a few nights it worked. The door was warm because old buildings are full of warm and cold places that don't make sense. Pipes that run where no plan says they run, dead air that holds heat for reasons no one's been paid to investigate since before I was born. The stillness I'd felt on the other side was my own pulse coming back at me through my palm. I had been a year without sleep that counted as sleep, and a person like that hears things, feels things, leaves her hand too long on a door. That was all. I told myself that was all, and I went on cleaning, and I let the song play out. But I have never been able to leave a number alone once it stops adding up, and Emile's story had a number in it that didn't. The place on Havorson. So one gray afternoon when I should have been asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with the curtains drawn against a daylight I no longer belonged to, and I looked it up. The new maternity center on Havorson, the one they'd supposedly moved everything to. It had opened 9 years ago. There was a little article about the ribbon cutting, a photograph of people in good coats holding oversized scissors, the mayor from back then, a cake. 9 years. And the flood on 4, I couldn't find a date for the flood, because nobody writes articles about a burst main in a building nobody loves. But Emile had said it the way you say a thing that happened long ago, long time ago, and his face when he said it had been the face of a much younger man remembering. 30 years he'd been in that building. The warmth in his voice hadn't been 9 years old. It had been older than me. So I sat there with my cold tea and did the arithmetic one more time, slowly, the way you check a sum you already know you got wrong. If 4 had gone dark long ago, and Havorson had only opened 9 years ago, then for years, for a long stretch of years with no number I could pin down but which had to be real, had to have width, there had been nowhere in this city for a child to be born. And that was simply not true. People had been born here the whole time. I knew some of them. I was one of them, 28 years ago, on a floor the elevator no longer admitted to. The story had a soft board in it, and I had put my weight down, and I had felt the give. So I did the thing you do, which is you go looking for the paper, because paper is supposed to settle these things. The hospital was old enough to still keep some of its history in its body rather than in a server somewhere, and the night shift gave me the run of places the day never would have. There was a corridor on the second floor, a stub of hallway that went nowhere anymore, where they'd hung the old directory boards from decades of renovations. The felt kind, black felt behind glass, with the little white plastic letters you push into the grooves. They hadn't taken them down. They just stopped updating them and hung newer ones beside them, so the whole wall was a kind of stratigraphy of the building, layer on layer of what it used to call itself. I stood there one night with my cart parked and my rag forgotten in my hand, and I read the oldest board, the one whose felt had gone the color of weak coffee, and on it, fourth from the top in those crooked pushed-in letters, it said for maternity and newborn. And someone, at some point, had reached behind the glass. The glass was unlocked, the little brass latch worn loose, and removed the letters of the word that came after the for. You could see where they'd been. The felt was a darker, unfaded black in the exact shape of the missing words, a clean rectangle of preserved dark where the letters had shielded it from years of light. The ghost of maternity and newborn, kept perfectly by its own erasure. They hadn't been able to bring themselves to take the whole line, just the words, just what for had been for. I want to tell you that unsettled me, and it did, but not the way a fright unsettles you. It unsettled me the way it unsettles you to find that someone has been tending a grave you thought abandoned, that the bareness isn't neglect but care, that someone keeps coming back to keep the words off the board the way you'd keep weeds off a stone. There was a records room, too, in the basement, near my own end of the building, and I'd cleaned past its door for weeks without thinking about it. Old medical records, the supervisor dolers had told me once, predigital, sealed for privacy. Not my concern, don't try the door. And I hadn't. But now I tried it lightly, not really meaning to go in, just to feel whether it was the kind of locked that means forgotten or the kind that means watched. It was the second kind. New lock on an old door, a good one, the brass still bright. Everything else in that basement was rust and the long patience of disuse. And here was this one bright new lock on a room full of paper nobody was supposed to want. I stood with my hand on it the way I'd stood with my hand on the warm door, and I thought, they sealed for, and they sealed the words for, and they sealed the paper that would tell you what for was for, and to all of it they gave the same care, the same gentle thoroughness, the care of people closing a door very quietly so as not to wake what's behind it. I went back to a mile. I told myself I was only going to ask him to settle the dates, to give me the boring true thing that would let the whole structure of my suspicion come down. He was at his little metal table in the loading dock with his coffee, and I sat, and I let some quiet go by the way you have to with him, and then I said it as lightly as I could. Haverson only opened 9 years ago, I said, but you said 4 flooded a long time ago, so where were the babies born in between? And he did the thing he does, the going soft, the snail on the horn. But underneath the softness, this time there was something I hadn't seen before, and it wasn't evasion exactly. Evasion I'd have understood. Evasion would almost have reassured me. It was fondness. He looked into his coffee and he smiled that same warm, faraway smile, the one that didn't match the words, and he said, oh, they always found somewhere. Babies find their way out, he said. They don't wait on a ribbon cutting. And then he looked up at me, and his clouded eyes were wet at the rims, the way an old man's eyes are wet at the rims for no reason, except I didn't think it was for no reason, and he said, that floor did a lot of good in its day. A lot of good came out of there. He said it the way you'd talk about a person. He said it the way you'd defend someone who wasn't in the room. I asked him then the only direct thing I ever asked him about it. I said, Emile, why is it warm? The door on 4 is warm. And the fondness went out of his face all at once, not into fear and not into anger, but into a kind of tender caution. The look a man gives you when you've walked up to the edge of something he loves, and he isn't sure whether to pull you back or let you look. They keep the heat on, he said again, like before. For the pipes. And then quieter, not quite to me. It was always a warm floor. Even then, warmest floor in the building. He turned his cup in his folded hands, and he didn't say anything else, and I understood that I had been led as close to the edge as he would allow, and that he wasn't evading me. He was protecting me, or he was protecting it. I genuinely could not tell which, and that not telling sat in my chest for nights afterward, colder than any lie would have. So I went back to the explanations, because that's what you do. You go back and you test each one honestly. You stop letting the song play and you actually listen to the words. The pipes. They keep the heat on for the pipes. But I had cleaned that building top to bottom by then. I knew its boiler rooms and its riser closets. I knew the cold floors and the warm ones, and heat for pipes doesn't behave the way that door behaved. Heat for pipes warms a wall unevenly, fierce near the riser and cold a foot away. It cooks the air. The fire stair on 4 had been cold the whole way up. I'd climbed through that gray, unheated chill with my hand cold on the rail. And only the door, only that one flat rectangle of steel, had been warm, and warm not like metal near a pipe, but warm like skin, even and patient and exactly the temperature of a held hand. A boiler doesn't do that. A vent doesn't do that. A vent moves air and you feel the moving, and there'd been no moving. The air on that landing had been as still as the inside of a drawer. I tested each explanation the way you test ice you're not sure of, putting weight on slowly, ready to take it back. And each one cracked under honest weight and let me through into the cold water of the obvious thing, which was that there was no ordinary reason for that door to be warm, and that I had known there was no ordinary reason since the first night, and had spent 2 weeks building a little house of dull facts to live in so I wouldn't have to know it. I stopped building the house. That's the real beginning of it, if you want a beginning. The night I stopped explaining the warmth to myself was the night I first really listened. It was the stillest night I'd worked. Some nights are like that in a big building. Even the hum drops, even the pipes go quiet, as though the whole structure has exhaled and not yet drawn the next breath. The patient floors were dim and settled, the nurses off in their pools of lamplight, everyone sleeping the deep middle of the night sleep that the body only gives up around 3. I finished 3 early. And then, the way you go toward a thing you've already decided about while telling yourself you haven't decided. I left my cart by the fire door and I went up the half flight into the dark where the bulb was out, and I stood in front of the door marked 4, and this time I didn't put my hand on it. I put my ear to it. For a moment there was only the warmth against my cheek, that body warmth coming through the steel into the side of my face, intimate as a forehead. And then, under it, very soft, the way you only hear a quiet sound once you've stopped needing it to be loud, I heard them. Babies, many of them. Not crying, not the raw red crying of a newborn that wants the world to fix something. Nothing distressed, nothing sharp. It was the other sound, the one you don't know until you've been near it, the sound a great many infants make when they are warm and held and not yet awake enough to want anything. A soft, layered murmuring, a cooing and a breathing and a small wet sighing, overlapping, dozens of it, more than dozens, a whole room full, a whole floor full, a sound like a field of doves settling at dusk, like rain that has decided to be gentle. It came up through the steel and into the bones of my face, and I stood there with my eyes shut and my whole body gone still in the way that the floor had gone still that first night, the 2 stillnesses meeting through the door. And moving through that soft, enormous sound, unhurried, calm, there was one voice, a woman's voice. Low, even, warm as the door, the kind of voice that has spent a long time near sleeping children and has worn itself smooth on them. She wasn't singing. She was saying something, the same something, over and over, moving as she said it. I could hear her cross from one side of the sound to the other. The way you hear a person move through a dark room by the way the other sounds part around them. And what she said, gently, patiently, to one after another of them, the way you'd settle a whole nursery one crib at a time, was, "Not yet. Not yet. Not yet, my love, not yet. Not yet." I don't know how long I stood there. I have lost the ability to tell you how long I stood at that door on any of the nights, because time on that landing didn't run the way it ran everywhere else. It pooled, it warmed, it held. I only know that when I finally took my cheek away from the steel, the cold of the stairwell came back into my face all at once like cold water, and my legs had gone stiff under me, and somewhere far below a real door banged, and a real cart rattled, and the ordinary night went on without me, and I went down into it and finished my route badly again and told no one. Who would I have told? Dolers, who'd looked at my hands and not my face. Emile, who already knew, who'd been listening at that door longer than I'd been alive, and had only ever called it a warm floor that did a lot of good. There was no one in the waking world to tell a thing like that to. That's the loneliest part, looking back, not the floor, but that the floor was the only thing I'd encountered in a year that I couldn't have explained away to a single other living person, and so it became the only thing that felt entirely mine. After that, I stopped pretending my route was an accident. I began to build my whole night around its ending. I'd work the far wings first, the parts of my territory furthest from the fire stair, and do them well, almost too well, the way you save the one good bite of a meal for last and clean your plate of everything else to earn it. I learned exactly how long my floors took so that I could finish near the stair, with 20 minutes of unwatched dark left before the early crew came on, and I'd leave the cart and go up and stand at the door and listen, and that became the real shape of the night, the thing the rest of the night was only the approach to. And I noticed something I didn't like noticing about myself, a small bodily thing. I'd started holding my breath, not from fear, to hear better. The sound through the door was so soft that my own breathing covered it, and so without deciding to, I'd taken to drawing one slow breath at the bottom of the half-flight and holding it all the way up, and standing at the door with my lungs full and still, so that nothing of mine, not even my breath, would come between me and that field of settling doves and that low, even voice saying not yet to all of them. And it was on one of those held-breath nights, near the end, standing with my cheek to the warm steel and my lungs aching and my whole self gone as quiet as I could make it, that I noticed the thing that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. The voice on the other side, the calm woman moving through her endless soft nursery, saying not yet, not yet, not yet, paused. She paused, mid-phrase, the way you pause when you think you've heard a board creak in a house you believed was empty. And I realized, with the slow, cold understanding of a thing you've actually known for several nights and only now let yourself say, that she paused exactly when I did. When I held my breath, she held her voice. When my own stillness deepened to listen for her saying stopped in the same instant to listen back, so that there were two of us, now one on each side of that warm door, each gone perfectly still in the dark, each holding everything in, each listening for the other across a width of steel that was the temperature of a living hand. My mother answered on the fourth ring, the way she always does now, like she has to come back from somewhere far away to do it. I could hear the place she lives in behind her voice, the soft, institutional nothing of it, a television in a common room 3 doors down, the particular hush of a building where everyone is being kept comfortable and no one is going anywhere. I'd called at an hour I never called, the gray middle of an afternoon I should have been sleeping through, and I think the strangeness of the hour put us both off balance, because for a moment neither of us said the things we usually say, the small, dishonest things, the I'm fine and the are you eating, and into that little gap of honesty, I asked her the thing I'd driven myself up out of half-sleep to ask. I asked her to tell me about the day I was born. She was quiet for a moment, and I heard her settle, the way she settles into a story she likes, and I felt bad because I wasn't asking for the story she liked. The story she liked was a short one and a warm one, and she'd told it my whole life. They almost didn't keep you, she'd say, and then she'd say it had been close, And then she'd say, "But here you are," and that was the shape of it, a closed loop, a thing worn smooth. But I didn't want the smooth stone this time. I wanted the rough underside of it, the part she'd never turned over for me. And I didn't know how to ask for that except to keep asking past the place where she usually stopped. So I let her tell the smooth version first. She told it slower than she used to, with the small, searching pauses she has now, and I closed my eyes in my dark kitchen with the curtains pulled, and let her voice put me back into a room I'd been in once and could not remember. And then, when she got to the end of it, to the "but here you are," I asked her the rough thing. I said, "Mom, what did you mean they almost didn't keep me?" Keep me from what? And she was quiet again, longer this time, and when she spoke her voice had changed, had gone careful, had gone into the register people use for the things they've decided not to carry around in the daylight. "You weren't breathing," she said. "When you came. You came out blue and quiet and you weren't breathing, and they took you over to the side to a table under a light and they worked on you. I didn't see it. They didn't let me see it. I just heard them. And I lay there and I heard a nurse, an older woman, talking to you the whole time she worked, not loud, not panicked, just steady, just talking to you the way you'd talk to someone you were keeping awake. And I remember she stopped here and I heard her breathe. I remember she kept saying the same thing. Not yet. She kept saying, not yet. Not yet, sweetheart. Not yet. Like she was telling you no. Like she was holding a door shut between you and somewhere, and the somewhere was pulling, and she just kept telling it, not yet, you can't have her yet. I did not say anything. I could not have said anything. The dark kitchen had gone very far away from me, and the only real thing in the world was the small, flat sound of my mother's voice coming through the phone from the far room where they keep her comfortable. And then she said the other thing, the thing I think she had never meant to tell me, the thing that came out of her in that honest hour, the way a stone comes loose from a wall you've leaned on too long. She said, "There were two of you." I want to slow down here because she did. She slowed down the way you slow walking past a place where something happened. "There were two of you," she said. "You were the smaller one. We didn't know, back then you often didn't know, and there were two of you and you were the small one and the other one." And here her voice did a thing I had never heard it do. It didn't break. It just thinned. It went thin as paper held up to a light. The other one never breathed at all. Not once. Not even the once you managed. They worked on you and you came back, and they worked on the other one and the other one didn't. And the same nurse who'd said not yet to you, who told the door no for you and one, she had to say something else to the other one. And your mother doesn't know what, because by then I was holding you, and you were the loudest thing in the world. And I'm ashamed to tell you I didn't think about the other one for a long time. There wasn't room. You took up all the room there was. I held the phone, and I looked at the line of gray daylight under my drawn curtain, and I understood several things at once. The way you understand the shape of a whole room in the half-second a lightning flash gives you. I understood that I had a sibling who had never drawn a single breath, who had been on a table under a light in that vanished ward on the same morning I was, who had been told something I would never know. I understood that the first words ever spoken over me, the first sentence I ever heard in this world before I had ears that knew what hearing was, had been "not yet." And I understood. This is the one that went into me coldest and stayed. That I had been climbing a half flight of dark stairs 3 or 4 nights a week to press my face against a warm door and listen to a calm woman move through a room full of soft, sleeping babies, saying, "Not yet. Not yet, my love. Not yet." In exactly the cadence my mother had just put into the phone from 100 miles away without knowing she was doing it. It was the same. That is the thing I keep having to say plainly because the mind keeps trying to soften it. The cadence was the same. "Not yet," and then a small dropped tenderness, "my love, sweetheart," and then the "not yet" again, the stress falling on the "not," the yet trailing off like a hand lifted from a forehead. My mother had carried that rhythm out of that room 28 years ago without meaning to. The way you carry a song you heard once in a frightening place. And I had been standing at a door listening to the room it came from. And I had not known until that gray afternoon that the voice through the steel and the voice in my mother's worst memory were saying the same thing in the same way. and that the thing they were saying had been said, first of all, about me. I told my mother I had to go. I think I told her I loved her. I hope I did. I hung up and I sat in the dark for a long time, and somewhere in that long time the understanding turned over and showed me its other face, the worse one, the one that wasn't about the past at all. Because if not yet was the thing the nurse had said over me, then not yet was a thing said about a particular person on a particular threshold. And the voice through the door was still saying it, all these years later, on the same floor, in the same cadence, and a held breath would make it pause. And my held breath would make it pause. And I had been telling myself for weeks that I had stumbled onto a strange, warm place that happened to be there. A thing I'd found, a leftover, an echo with no address. And it wasn't that. You don't say not yet to no one. Not yet is the back half of a sentence whose front half is a name. Somewhere up there, behind the warm steel, in the soft, endless dusk field of all those settling doves, a calm woman had been saying the unfinished half of a sentence for 28 years, and the front half of it, the name, the who, was me. After that, the nights changed, or I changed in them, which comes to the same thing. I stopped saving the door for last as if it were a treat I had to earn. I went to it first now, on my breaks, in the dead, pooled middle of the shift, and I gave it the time I used to give the floors. The floors suffered. I knew they suffered, and I cleaned them the way you do a thing with your hands while your whole self is elsewhere. And if Dolers noticed, she didn't say, because Dolers looked at hands and not at faces, and my hands were still moving. But I was not in the corridors anymore, not really. I was up the half flight in the dark, with my cheek against the warm wood. And it was warm wood now, or I had started to think of it as wood. The steel had stopped feeling like steel under my face, and started feeling like the warm flank of something, like the side of a sleeping animal, like a chest that rose and fell. Because it had started to do that. I have to tell this part carefully because it is the part where a reasonable person stops trusting me, and I understand, and I would stop trusting me too, except it happened against my own wish to be reasonable, which is the only kind of evidence I have ever trusted in myself. The warmth had begun to respond. The first nights, weeks before, it had been steady, even patient, the unwavering body warmth of something keeping itself ready. But now, when I came up the stairs, in the few seconds before my cheek even touched it, the warmth would, there is no honest word but the wrong-sounding one, it would deepen. It would come up to meet me. I'd reached the top of the half-flight, and the air against my face would already be warmer than it had been the breath before, as though the door had heard my step on the stair, had recognized the particular weight and rhythm of me, and had brightened the way a person's face brightens an instant before they've consciously decided to smile at someone they love. And when I leaned in and put my cheek to it and went still, the warmth would settle around the side of my face, would seem to cup it, the way the cooling air settles around you when you lie down at last into a bed someone has warmed for you on purpose. And I want to be honest, because I promised at the start I'd be honest, that this both frightened me and flattered me, and that I could not tell most nights which of those two feelings was the larger one. To be recognized. To have a thing brighten because you, specifically you, have come. After a year of being the one who recognized and tended and brightened for someone else. After a year of being the warm bed somebody else lay down into, until I had no warmth left to be a bed with, to be, for once, the one who is waited for. I leaned my whole face into that warmth, and I felt it know me, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt since before my mother got sick. Something I'm not proud was so easy to give. And the thing I felt was, simply, that I had been missed. That somewhere I had a place, and the place had been keeping itself warm, and it had been keeping itself warm for me. My waking life, what little was left of it, thinned to almost nothing in those weeks. I'd never had much daylight life to begin with. That had been the whole point, the night job, the curtains, the not being asked, but now even the thin, frayed edge of it came apart in my hands. I slept in snatches with the curtains pulled so tight that no hour showed through them, so that I'd surface not knowing if it was 4 in the afternoon or 4 in the morning. and not much caring, because the only hour that meant anything was the hour I'd be back at the door. My phone filled up and I let it. There were messages from the world, the small tugs of a life still technically attached to me. A friend I hadn't answered in so long that her message was just a question mark. The pharmacy, a number I didn't know, the bright, meaningless weather of other people's needs. I let it all go to the gray pile. I'd watch the screen light up on the table and go dark again and feel nothing but a mild, faraway gratitude that none of it could reach me. And one of those gray afternoons, surfacing from a sleep that hadn't rested me, I saw that my mother had called. She'd left a message, which she almost never does because the buttons confuse her now. I lay in the dark and I played it with the phone held away from my ear, and her voice came thin into the room, careful and searching with the long pauses. She said she'd been thinking about our talk. She said she hoped she hadn't upset me, telling me all that after all this time. She said, and the pauses got longer here, and I could hear her hunting for me across the distance, the way you hunt for someone's hand in the dark. She said, "You sounded far away, sweetheart. The last time. You sounded like you were somewhere far away when we talked, and I didn't like it, and I wanted to hear your voice. Call your mother. Will you call your mother?" And then a pause so long I thought the message had ended. And then, very quietly, almost to herself, the way Emile said things almost to himself. "I don't want you somewhere I can't reach you." I did not call her back. I want that on the record too, because it is the worst thing I did in all of this. Worse than anything I did at the door, and I did it by doing nothing at all. I lay in the dark with her voice fading in the room, and I told myself I'd call when I woke. And I knew as I told myself that it was the kind of lie you tell to a person you've already left. I let the screen go dark. I pulled the blanket up. And the thing I thought about, lying there, was not my mother in her far, comfortable room asking me not to go somewhere she couldn't reach. The thing I thought about was the door, and how in a few hours I'd climb the half flight and the warmth would come up to meet me before I even touched it. That night I went to the door first thing, before I'd cleaned a single corridor, and I climbed into the dark, and the warmth rose to meet me the way it always did now. And I put my cheek against it, and I closed my eyes, and I went still. And the field of soft sleeping sound was there as it always was. The dozens, the hundreds, the dusk field of doves, the calm woman somewhere in the middle of it moving and saying her half a sentence over and over. But this time, when I pressed in close and went as still as I have ever made myself, the sound did something it had never done. It quieted. Not all at once, and not into silence, into attention. The way a room of children quiets, not because they've been told to, but because something has come in that they all, at the same moment, turn to look at. The soft, layered murmuring thinned and gentled and drew in on itself. The breathing settled. The small, wet sighs hushed one by one. And I felt through the warm wood against the whole side of my face, in the bones behind my ear. I felt the entire floor turn. Toward me. The way a field of flowers will turn, slowly, all together, toward the one warm thing in the sky. The calm woman's voice didn't stop this time. It softened, it lowered. It gentled down to almost nothing. But it kept on, and I understood that she was not quieting them the way you quiet a disturbance. She was quieting them the way you lower your voice when the one you've been waiting for finally comes to the door, so that the others won't crowd, so that there'll be room, so that the warm hush will be ready. I stood there with the whole floor turned toward me, and the warmth cupped around my face like two hands, and for the first time it did not feel like a thing I had found. A found thing doesn't turn to look at you. A found thing doesn't warm itself ahead of your footsteps or hush 100 sleeping voices to make room at a door. This had not been waiting there for anyone who happened up the stairs. It had been waiting there for me, with my name in the front half of its endless patient sentence, keeping a place warm against the long, cold years until I was ready to come and take it. And the thing that frightened me, standing there in the dark with my mother's unreturned voice still somewhere in my coat pocket, the thing that frightened me was not the warmth, and not the turning, and not the hush. It was that I felt, rising in me as quiet and certain and bodily as the warmth itself, with a calm that scared me more than any fear could have, that I had started to want it. There is a cat that lives in the hospital, though no one will admit to owning it, and it is the only warm thing in the building at night that wants nothing from me. I'd seen it twice before I ever spoke to it, which is a strange way to put it, but that's how I came to think of it later, that there had been a before when it was only a cat and an after. The first time it was a shape at the end of the basement corridor, low and unhurried, crossing from one pool of dark into another with the particular indifference cats keep for people who have not yet been useful to them. The second time it was sitting on the lid of a dumpster by the loading dock at 2 in the morning, washing one paw with the long patience of something that has nowhere it would rather be, and a mile was talking to it. Not the way you talk to an animal you're performing kindness at. The way you talk to someone you've known a long time and have run out of new things to say to and don't mind. The basement staff fed it. I learned this slowly, the way you learn all the real arrangements of a place, the ones that aren't written anywhere. There was a chipped saucer behind the boiler that was never quite empty. There was a folded square of moving blanket on top of the warm conduit by the electrical room, pressed into the shape of a sleeping body. Nobody discussed it. If you'd asked Dolers, she'd have said there was no cat, the way she'd have said there was no fourth floor, with the flat administrative certainty of a person whose job is to know what the building officially contains. But the saucer filled itself, and the blanket held its shape, and on cold nights you'd find the cat folded onto the warm conduit with its paws tucked under it like a loaf set out to rise, and it would open one eye at you and decide, every time, that you were not worth the second one. It was gray, or it was the color the dark made of whatever color it was. I never saw it in daylight, which is its own kind of fact. A working cat's body, lean through the shoulders, one ear notched from something it had survived before it ever came here. It moved through the building at night the way I had wanted to move through it, the way I'd told myself I did move through it. Unowned, unwatched, awake while everyone slept, asking nothing and carrying nothing it would let you see. It went everywhere. That was the thing about it that I only understood the meaning of later. It went everywhere. The patient floors, the morgue corridor, the chapel that nobody used, the riser closets, the long dead hallway with the felt directory boards. It had the run of the whole sleeping building, and it took the run of it, fearless, the one creature in all that dark that the held breath corridors did not seem to watch, because it was already part of what they were holding their breath around. It went everywhere, except up the half-flight to 4. I didn't notice this for what it was at first, because why would you? You don't keep a ledger of the places an animal hasn't gone. But the cat had started, in those last weeks, to find me. I'd be working a far wing, mind already up the stairs ahead of my body, and I'd turn and it would be there at the edge of the light, sitting, watching me with both eyes for once. And then it would walk a little way toward the stairwell and stop and look back, the way a dog will when it wants you to follow, except this was the opposite. I understood eventually. This was the exact opposite. It wasn't leading me toward. It was putting itself between. The night it finally did the thing it had been working up to doing, I had gone to the door early, the way I did everything early now, and I had climbed the half-flight into the dark where the bulb was out, and the warmth had come up to meet me the way it always did, brightening the air against my face before I'd reached the top step, recognizing the weight and the rhythm of me, glad. I'd let myself start using that word, in the privacy of my own head, glad that I had come. And I'd put my cheek to the warm wood and gone still, and the field of soft sleeping sound had drawn in and turned toward me, and the calm woman had lowered her voice to make room, and I had stood there in the warm hush with my eyes shut, and let it hold the side of my face in its two patient hands, and I had felt the wanting rise in me, steady now, bodily, almost peaceful, the way water rises in a slowly filling room. And something touched my ankle. I came back into myself so fast it hurt, a cold drop, the stairwell chill rushing back into my face all at once. The cat was at the bottom of the half-flight. It had not come up. It stood on the landing for 3 with its front paws right at the line where the steps began, at the very edge of the warmth's reach, and it was looking up at me, and it would not come another inch. I said something to it, some small foolish thing here, come here, the way you do, and it didn't move except its tail, which lashed once slow, the way a cat's tail moves when it is looking at a thing it does not like. And then it did a thing I have thought about more than almost anything else in this whole account. It looked at me, and then it looked past me, up the half-flight at the warm door, and it flattened. The notched ear went back. The lean body dropped lower, not crouching to spring, but crouching to be small, to be unnoticed. The posture of a creature that has met something much larger than itself, and would prefer that the something not look its way. The one animal in that building that nothing frightened was frightened of the door. And it would not come up to me, and it would not leave without me, and so it sat itself down at the very edge of the warmth, between me and the stairs down, and it waited. I came down to it. I don't fully know why, except that the wrongness of seeing that fearless thing made afraid undid something in me. Some spell thread, enough of one that I could move my feet back down the steps away from the door, which I had not done early in a night in a long time. And when I got to the bottom, the cat stood and pressed the whole length of its side against my shins. Hard, insistent, the way a cat will herd you. And I sat down on the cold steel step of the third floor landing with my back to the stairs going up, and the cat got into my lap. It had never let me touch it. 3 weeks of finding me in corridors, and it had never once let the distance close. And now it climbed into my lap and turned itself around twice and lay down against my stomach and put its small heat into me, deliberately, the way you'd press a warm cloth to an ache. And I understood, sitting there, that this was the point. That it had come to put its warmth against me on purpose. Because there were two warmths in that stairwell now. There was the wide, patient warmth coming down the half-flight from the door, the one that had no edges, that filled the air, that wanted me the way a tide wants the shore. And there was this one, this small, specific, furious, living heat in my lap, a heat with a heartbeat in it going much too fast, a heat that was working, that cost something to make, that came out of a body that had to eat from a chipped saucer to keep making it. And with the small one sitting against me, I could feel the wide one for the first time as a separate thing. The way you can only see the color of a wall once someone holds a different color up beside it. I put my hand on the cat. Its heart was going hard under my palm, fast and frightened and absolutely alive. And it stayed anyway. It stayed against me with its fear. And I sat very still on the cold step in the dark with one warmth in my lap and one warmth at my back. And somewhere in the stillness of that, I want to be careful, because there was no voice. There was nothing you could have recorded. Nothing I could swear to in the daylight. Somewhere in that stillness, a knowing arrived in me that I had not put there. It came the way a thing comes to you in the half-second before sleep, whole, already finished, in no words and then in words, because words are the only net I have to carry it in. And what it was this. You were already carried out of there once, little one. That was the first of it, and it landed in me with the cat's heartbeat under my hand, and I felt the truth of it the way you feel the truth of cold water, all at once and all over. I had been carried out of that floor once already. 28 years ago, blue and quiet, off a table under a light, into my mother's arms, into the loudest room in the world. The door at the top of the stairs was not where I came from. It was where I had almost stayed. There is a difference, and the cat's small heat made me able to feel the difference, and the difference was everything. What waits behind that door is only the warm part they kept of you. That was the second of it, and it was worse and gentler. The warmth was not a place. It was not a country I could emigrate to, not a room with my name kept warm in it the way I'd let myself believe. It was a part. It was the part that had not come with me, the not yet of me, the unborn remainder, the warm, soft nothing I had been an instant before I was anything at all, kept all this time on that floor the way the felt board had kept the dark shape of the word it lost. They keep the heat on, Emile had said, for the pipes. But it wasn't pipes. It was the kept warm leftover of every child that the floor had worked over and not won, and the ones it had won, the warm, unborn ghost of who you were before the cold air hit you and made you cry and made you reel. Mine was up there, my almost. And so was my siblings, the one that never drew the one breath I managed, kept warm beside mine in the soft, enormous dusk. And the not yet had been keeping both our places, and the woman moving through the doves had been telling all the others it wasn't their turn, because the turn she was holding open was ours. And it can't open from its side. That was the third of it, and it was the one that changed the shape of everything, the one I have held onto since the way you hold a rail on a dark stair. The door could not open itself. For all its warmth, for all its patience, for all the way it brightened ahead of my step and hushed its 100 voices to make room and cupped my face in its 2 hands, it could do nothing. It had no hand on its own latch. It had waited 28 years not because it was biding its time, not because it was coming for me, but because it could not come, could not reach, could not so much as turn the handle, could only wait, the way the warm part of you that you left behind can only ever wait on the far side of being born for you to decide to come back. It has to wait for you to say yes. I sat on the cold step and I cried, quietly, the way you cry when something has been set down that you'd been carrying without knowing it was heavy. Because do you see what that did? It took the warmth and it turned it from a fate into a question. All those nights I'd stood at the door, I'd felt it as something happening to me, a tide, a pull, a place that had a claim on me and was patiently collecting. And it wasn't. It was an invitation. It was the most patient invitation in the world, warm and wordless and endlessly willing to wait. And it had no power on earth except the power I gave it by considering it, and an invitation. This is the thing the cat's heartbeat put into me, hard, fast, alive. An invitation can be declined. You can stand at a held-open door your whole life and never walk through it. The door cannot make you. The warmth cannot make you. The not yet had only ever been the back half of a sentence whose front half was my name. Yes, but the woman saying it could not finish it for me. Only I could finish it. With a yes, and I would go warm and unmade into the soft dusk forever. Or with the other word, the word that had held that floor shut over me once already, when an old nurse had said it for me because I was too new to say it for myself. I carried the cat down to the basement that night. It let me. It rode against my chest with its fast heart slowing the lower we went, the warmth coming back into it as the warmth of the door fell away below us. No, behind us, above us. I had it backwards in my body for a moment and had to right it. And by the time we reached the boiler and the chipped saucer and the blanket pressed into the shape of a sleeping body, the cat was a loaf again, calm, ordinary, restored to being only a cat. I set it down on its warm conduit. It looked at me with one eye and then, slowly, deliberately, with both. And then it tucked its paws under itself and closed them. And that was all, that was the whole of what it gave me, and it was everything. I did not go back to the door that night. For one whole shift, I cleaned my floors the way I used to clean them. All of them. Well, the far wings and the near ones, the long corridors turned to black mirrors under the half-light, and I finished nowhere near the fire stair. And I rode the elevator down past where 4 should have been without looking at the panel, and I clocked out into the gray beginning of a day I had no use for. And I went home and pulled the curtains and lay down, and I did not sleep, because the absence of the door was in me like a missing tooth. That exact feeling, the tongue going back and back to the warm gap where a thing had been, unable to leave it alone, the whole mouth organized around the one place that was empty now. I lay in the dark and felt how much it had cost to not climb those stairs, and the cost was enormous. The cost was a low, constant ache through the whole body, and I understood that I had not solved anything by walking away for one night. I had only learned the size of the thing. Because here is what the cat could not change, for all its small, brave heat, for all the truth it put into me on that cold step. It had turned the warmth from a fate into a choice. But a choice is harder than a fate, not easier. A fate you can only suffer. A choice you have to make, and then make again, and the door would be warm tomorrow night, and the night after, and it would brighten ahead of my step every single time, and hush its doves, and cup my face. And wait, only wait, never reach, never force, the most patient open hand in the world. And all I would ever have to do, on any night in any week hour, was say the one small word it was holding its breath to hear. I lay in my dark room with the curtains drawn against a day I'd given up, and I held the memory of the cat's heartbeat against my palm like the last warm coal of an ordinary life, the small real heat of a thing that had to eat to keep on being warm. and I felt the door's warmth at last for exactly what it was: patient, certain, asking nothing, requiring everything, waiting only and entirely on me. And I was afraid, for the first time in all of it, not of the warmth and not of the dark, but of how easy it would be, on some thin, cold morning when no cat came, to simply say yes. I want to be honest about how good it sounded, because if I make it seem like an easy thing to refuse, then I'll have lied to you about all of it, and a lie at the end would poison everything that came before. I stayed away 3 nights. I want that counted, because I paid for each of them. 3 nights I cleaned my floors the way a person cleans floors, the far wings and the near ones, the black mirror corridors under the half-light, and I rode the elevator down past the place where 4 wasn't and kept my eyes on my own doubled reflection in the steel and did not look at the panel. 3 mornings I went home and lay in the dark with the cat's heartbeat still in my palm like a coin I kept turning over, and 3 times the absence of the door sat in me like that missing tooth, the tongue going back and back to the warm gap. And on the 4th night I went up the stairs. I'd known I would the way you know the end of a sentence you're still saying. I want to be honest about that too. The cat had given me a choice, and the first thing I did with the choice was choose the door. It met me the way it always did, brightening the air against my face before I'd reached the top step, and I put my cheek to the warm wood and went still, and the field of soft sleeping sound drew in and turned toward me, and the calm woman lowered her voice to make the room. But something was different that 4th night, or I was different in it, because the cat had named the thing for me, and you cannot unknow a thing once it's been named. I stood there in the warm hush, and for the first time I was not only listening. I was understanding, which is a slower and a colder act, and the understanding came over me the way water comes up through floorboards, from underneath, without a sound, until I was standing in it to the ankle and then the knee. This is what I understood, and I'll lay it out plainly, because I spent so many nights letting it stay soft, and I owe the hard version now. That floor was a threshold. Not a ruined ward, not a flooded shell with the heat left on for the pipes. A threshold, the kind a place becomes when too many crossings happen in it, the way a doorstep wears to a hollow under 100 years of feet. So many had begun there. Some had begun and gone on, out into the loud, cold world, into being. And some had begun and not gone on. The never quite, the almost, the ones the table under the light had worked over and not won, and the warm, unborn remainder of the ones it had, all of them kept, all of them held, in a soft, enormous waiting that had no day in it and no night, no hunger, no grief, no trying. The 4th floor was where the not yet was kept warm. And the calm woman moving through it, saying her half a sentence over and over to one, and then another, was its keeper. She wasn't soothing a disturbance. She was tending a nursery that never resolved into mourning, an old nurse who had stepped through her own threshold long ago and stayed on the far side of it to keep the others warm. Because somebody has to, because a place that holds the almost born cannot hold them alone. And then the second understanding came up through the first, and this is the one that took my breath, the one I had been circling for weeks without letting myself land on it. Every not yet I had ever heard through that door, all those nights, all those dozens and hundreds of soft refusals murmured into the dusk. They were not for the babies. Or they were, but only the way a held door is for the people who don't get to come through it. She was telling them no. Not yet, my love, not yet, meaning, it isn't your turn, meaning this place is kept, meaning the warm seat at this threshold is spoken for and you must wait. All of you must wait because it is being held. For someone. She had been saying it for 28 years to a room full of those who wanted in, and the reason none of them could have the place was that the place was mine. The not yet was never a comfort she was giving the room. It was a sign she was hanging on a door, reserved, kept warm. The warmth I had felt through the steel from the very first night, the body heat, the held hand heat, the warmth of a mattress a minute after someone rises. It was the warmth of a seat kept for a guest who is late, kept faithfully, kept against all the cold years, by a keeper who would not let anyone else sit down in it no matter how they pressed. It was mine. The place was mine. I had not stumbled onto a strange, warm leftover. I had come back to a table that had been set for me before I was born, and left set. All this time, the plate kept warm, the chair pushed in, the keeper standing patient by it telling the hungry crowd that it wasn't theirs. It was hers. She's only late. She'll come. I think that's the moment I stopped being afraid of it in the ordinary way, and started being afraid of it in the way you fear a thing you love. Because to be kept a place. Do you understand what that is? To a person like I was. I had spent a year being the one who keeps the place. I had been the warm chair somebody else sat down into until I had no warmth left to be a chair with. And no one, in all that year, in all the years before it, had kept one for me. My friends had drifted off like water to the low ground. My mother had gone somewhere I had to call across, somewhere I couldn't reach, and I had let even that thread go slack. And here, behind a warm door at the top of a dark half-flight, was the one place in all the world that had never stopped holding my seat. That had told everyone else no for 28 years. That wanted nothing from me except that I come, at last, and sit down and be kept. And then she spoke to me. I have to slow down for this the way she slowed down for it. All those nights she had said the same 2 words to the room, never to me, the keepers know, the holding phrase. But that 4th night, with my cheek to the warm wood and the whole floor turned toward me, and the understanding standing in me to the knee, the voice came close on the other side of the door, close the way it had never come, close enough that I felt the warmth of the saying itself, the breath of it, against the steel against my face. And it did not say not yet. It said my name. Not my name. I want to be exact, because the exactness is the whole tenderness of it and the whole danger. It said something that stood where my name would stand, the way a word in a language you spoke before you had language stands in for a thing, a sound that was the shape of being called, the shape of being the one meant, the front half of the sentence I had been hearing the back half of my entire life finally spoken aloud, soft, certain, glad. She said the front half. And then, where the not yet had always come, where for 28 years she had hung the sign that said wait, the sign that said kept, the sign that said no instead of that, gentle as a hand lifted from a forehead, unhurried with all the time in the world and none of it pressing, she said, whenever you like. Whenever you like, my love. The holding turned in one breath from a wall into a door. Not yet had been a thing said to others to keep them off. Whenever you like was a thing said to me, only to me, and it opened. It meant the waiting was over because the waited for had come. It meant your turn, sweetheart, no rush ever again, your turn whenever you're ready and the place is warm, and I've kept it, and I'll keep it as long as you need, and the moment you wanted it is yours. I'm not going to pretend to you that I wasn't undone. I want to be honest about how good it sounded, and here is how good it sounded. It sounded like the end of cold mornings. You don't know, unless you've had a year like mine, what a cold morning costs, surfacing from a sleep that didn't rest you into a daylight that wants things. The long arithmetic of getting up, of being a person, of arranging your face for a world that keeps asking how you're doing. It sounded like the end of that, of all of that, forever. No more cold mornings. No more curtains drawn against an hour I had no use for. No more lying in the dark feeling a life come apart in my hands like wet paper. No more loneliness, and I had been so lonely, for so long, that I'd stopped being able to feel it as a separate thing, the way you stop feeling a sound you've heard all day until it stops. Behind the door there was no loneliness, because there was no one to be lonely, because there was no I left over to do the missing. Just warmth. Just the soft, enormous dusk and the field of settling doves and the keeper's voice, and no edge anywhere, nothing to hold yourself against, nothing to try at. And the trying, God, the trying, that was the one that reached deepest because that was the one I was most tired of. To live is to try endlessly at everything to keep getting up, to keep the curtains open, to keep answering, to keep being a person who has a future when you have lost the thread of why. Behind the door there was no trying. The not yet doesn't try. It is held. It is kept warm by someone else's faithfulness and asked for nothing. And it does not have to get up. And it does not have to be brave. And it does not have to watch the people it loves grow thin and far away and finally let go. It does not have to watch its mother fade. That was in there too, in the warmth, in the offer. That I would never have to make the next call I wasn't making. Never have to drive to the soft institutional building and sit by the bed and feel her come back from somewhere far away to know me, and then, one day, not come back. To go through the door was to be spared all the grief that was still ahead of me, the whole long freight of it, by simply never being there to be grieved at, by stepping back across the threshold into before, where my mother was a warmth I'd never been pulled out of, where there was no loss because there had been no having, where the small dead sibling who never drew a breath was kept warm right beside me, and neither of us had to carry the other's absence because neither of us would ever be apart. That is how good it sounded. I'm not going to make it smaller than it was. A reasonable person, a person who had not been hollowed the way I'd been hollowed, might tell you it sounds like nothing, like giving up, like death dressed in soft words, and they would be right. And they would also have no idea, because they have never stood at a warm door at the worst hour of their worst year and been told, gently, by a voice that kept a place for them when no one else on earth did, your turn, whenever you like. I put my hand on the latch. I don't remember deciding to. That's the truth, and it's the frightening part. There was no moment of choosing, no weighing, no yes said in any room of me that I could point to. There was only that my cheek was against the warm wood, and the keeper had said, whenever you like, and the wanting had risen in me past the knee, past the waist, warm and certain and almost peaceful, the way water rises in a slowly filling room until the floor you were standing on is simply gone. And then my hand was on the latch, the cold steel latch, the only cold thing on that whole warm door, and the cold of it under my palm was the first edge I'd felt since I came up the stairs. And I leaned my weight into it the way you lean into a thing you have already, somewhere below knowing, agreed to. And the latch gave. And the door came open, not all at once, not flung, nothing sudden. This place never did anything sudden. It came open slow and willing the width of a hand, the width of the gap you leave a child's door at night so the dark won't be complete. And through that hand's width of opening, the warmth came pouring out. I had felt it through the steel for weeks. I had never felt it unmediated, and there is no describing what it was, except that it was the inside of every warm thing I have named to you and more than all of them. It was the held hand and the warmed bed and the forehead under your lips and the loud first room your mother holds you in, all of it at once, pouring out through that hands-width gap and over me and around me, asking me in. Not pulling. It never pulled. It only opened and poured and asked, the most patient open hand in the world. And on the far side of the gap was the soft, enormous dusk and the field of doves gone hushed and waiting and the keeper standing close. So close, with the place kept warm just past her, the chair pushed in, the plate still warm after 28 years, and all I had to do was let the door come the rest of the way and step across. And against it, all at once, in the same half-second, the way the whole shape of a room comes in a single flash of lightning, against it came three things. The cat's heart, the small, specific, furious, living heat of it under my palm on the cold step, going much too fast, a heat that cost something, that came out of a body that had to eat from a chipped saucer to keep on being warm, a heat that stayed against me with all its fear, because it had come on purpose to put itself between me and exactly this. You were already carried out of there once, little one. And my mother's voice, the far-off thin-to-paper voice from the message I never answered, hunting for me across the distance the way you hunt for a hand in the dark. You sounded far away, sweetheart. I don't want you somewhere I can't reach you. The one place she could never reach was through that door. To step across was to go somewhere she could not call across to, ever, the somewhere she had said no to for me once, on a table under a light, before I had ears that knew what no was. And the cold, the memory of cold daylight, of cold mornings, the whole thin, grieving freight of my real life. And the strange thing, the thing I could not have predicted, was that the cold did not come as a horror to flee from. It came as mine. The cold was mine. The trying was mine. My mother fading was mine, hers and mine together, ours, a having so real it could be lost, which is the only kind of having there is. The door offered me the end of all of it, and in the half-second of the warmth pouring over me, I understood that the end of all of it was the end of all of it, that you cannot keep only the warm parts, that to put down the grief I would have to put down the love it was the shadow of, and the cat's heart and my mother's far voice and the cold, ungrateful, precious daylight were not weights I was carrying. They were the thing itself. They were the having. They were the loudest room in the world that I had been pulled into once already, blue and quiet and not breathing, by a woman who told the door no for me because I was too new to tell it myself. The door is open the width of a hand, and the warmth is pouring out and asking me in, gentle, certain, whenever I like. And I hear myself from very far away. From the cold far side of a threshold I was carried across once and have to choose now to keep. Say the only two words that have ever held that floor shut. I said it. I'd like to be able to tell you it came out of me strong, the way a person plants a flag, but it didn't. It came out the way the truest things come out, small and almost without breath. The two words I had heard 1,000 times through that steel and had never once spoken, not yet. I said it into the hand's width of warm dark, into the pouring warmth, into the close glad presence of the keeper waiting just past the gap. And the moment I said it, I understood that I had taken the holding spell out of her mouth and put it into my own. For 28 years, she had said it for me, to all the others, to keep my place. Now I was saying it of myself, to her, to the place, to the soft, enormous dusk. Not yet, meaning I am not finished, meaning I have not yet done the thing I came out of that floor to do. Whatever it is, even if I don't know it, even if I never know it, not yet, because I am still in the middle of being alive, and you do not leave the middle of a thing. And then I leaned my weight against the door, the cold latch under my palm, the one cold, honest thing in all that warmth, and I pushed it shut. It did not resist me. I want to say that because I had braced for it to, braced the way you brace against a wave. I had thought the warmth would fight, would surge, would pull the door from my hand the last few inches into open. It didn't. It had never pulled, not once in all those nights. I'd only felt it as pulling because I had been leaning toward it so hard that any stillness on its part felt like a tide. The door swung shut as easily as any door, slow and willing, the same slow willingness with which it had opened. And the warmth narrowed to a band, and then to a thread, and then the latch met the frame with a small sound, an ordinary sound. The sound a door makes anywhere, and the seal closed, and I stood in the dark of the half-light with my hand flat on warm wood, and my heart doing that slow, enormous thing it had done the very first night. I didn't take my hand away. That's the part I need you to understand, because it would be a smaller and a colder story if I had slammed it and fled. I kept my palm against the warmth, and I stayed, because closing the door was not the whole of it. Closing it was only the no. There was a kindness still owed, and the kindness was the harder half. I said the rest of it to her with my cheek against the wood, the way you say the last things to someone through a door you both know won't open again. I told her she could stop. That was the shape of it, though I don't remember the exact words, only that they came slow and certain and cost me to say. I told her she had kept the place faithfully, and she had kept it well, and that I was not coming to sit down in it. Not tonight, and not on the thin, cold morning she had been so patiently waiting for. Not ever. And that this meant, and here my voice did the paper-thin thing my mother's had done, that she could put the waiting down. She had been holding a door shut over me since before I had ears. She had told a roomful of the wanting that it wasn't their turn, for 28 years, because the turn was mine, and I was telling her now to stop holding it. Let it be someone's turn. Let it be no one's. Let the chair be just a chair. You kept it warm longer than anyone has ever kept anything warm for me, and the way I thank you is to tell you that you are free to let it go cold. And then I said the hardest thing, the thing I had come up those stairs all those nights without ever once being able to say, because I hadn't known until the cat put the truth in me that there was anyone there to say it to. I let go of my sibling, the small one beside the small one, the almost that never drew the single breath I managed, kept warm in that dusk beside the warm, unborn remainder of me all this time, so that neither of us would have to carry the other's absence. I had wanted that. God help me, In the warmest of those nights, I had wanted that more than I wanted daylight, to go back across the threshold to where we were both still held, both still kept, neither of us ever apart, no grief because no having. And standing there with my hand on the cooling wood, I told that one goodbye, which is a thing you can only do for someone by agreeing, finally, to be apart from them. I told my sibling I would carry the absence, that I would rather carry it, out in the cold, as mine, than dissolve back into the warm where there'd be no I left to do the carrying. I said I was sorry it never got a loud first room. I said I'd try to make mine loud enough for both. And I let it go, out of the holding, out of the kept warm, out into whatever is on the far side of a threshold for the ones who never crossed back, which I do not know and was not given to know, only that it was no longer my job to keep them here, and that keeping them here had never been a kindness to them, only to me. The warmth went out of the door under my hand while I was still saying it. Not all at once. Nothing on that floor was ever all at once. It went the way warmth leaves a body, the way it leaves a held hand after the holding's done, from the middle outward, the deep, even body heat thinning and cooling and giving way degree by degree to the gray chill that every other surface in that stairwell had carried the whole time. And under my palm, through the wood, I felt the floor on the other side change. The field of soft sleeping sound, the dusk field of doves I had pressed my face to night after night. It didn't cry. It didn't startle. There was nothing distressed in it. It quieted. It settled the way a nursery settles into a sleep so deep it stops being a nursery and becomes only a room. The murmuring thinned and gentled and drew down, and the keeper's voice with it lower and lower, not cut off but released, a held note finally allowed to fall, and the last of it I heard, or felt, or have told myself since that I felt, was not yet and not my name and not whenever you like. It was something like rest, given and received at once, the sound a person makes when they set down a weight they have carried so long that the setting down staggers them. And then there was no sound. And then there was no warmth. And then there was only a cold steel fire door at the top of a dark half-flight, with the number 4 stenciled on it in old cream-colored paint, the temperature of every other dead thing in that stairwell. And I took my hand off it, and the cold of the stairwell came into my fingers the way it always had, except that this time there was nothing on the other side of the door listening for me to do it. I went down the stairs. I finished my route. I want to put that here, the plainness of it, because that is what the rest of my life turned out to be made of, and I had forgotten that plainness could be a mercy. I cleaned my floors, all of them, the far wings and the near ones. The long corridors turned to black mirrors under the half-light, and when I was done I rode the elevator down and I did look at the panel this time, 1, 2, 3, 5, and the gap where 4 should be sat there exactly as it had on my first night, and it did not pull at me. That was the thing I noticed, writing down. The number was still missing, and the missing of it no longer reached into my chest and turned. It was just a building's old superstition again, a number poured out of the concrete decades ago, a small, dull wrongness of the kind buildings are full of. I had been carrying it as a question, and now it was only a fact, and a fact weighs nothing. I clocked out into the gray beginning of a day, and instead of going home to pull the curtains against it, I stood on the steps of the hospital where I was born and I let the cold morning happen to me. It was an ordinary cold morning. There is no other kind. I've come to think they are all ordinary. That's their whole terrible gift, that the world just keeps producing them, one after another, gray and unremarkable and free. The air had that early chemical smell of a city deciding to wake up. A bus went by mostly empty. Somewhere a delivery gate rattled up. My breath showed and I watched it show, the small cloud of it, proof of the warm working engine of me that had to eat to keep on being warm, the same as the cat's, the same as my mother's, the same as every one of us out here on the cold side of the door who has to make our own heat and spend it and make it again. I was so tired. I was tired in a way that had a bottom to it. Finally, a tiredness you could sleep off, not the other kind. And I went home, and I opened the curtains. That sounds like nothing. It was the hardest thing I did that whole year, harder than the door, because the door was one night and the curtains were every morning after. I pulled them back, and the gray light came into the room that had been dark for so long it had forgotten it was a room, and I stood in it, and it was awful, and I left them open anyway. I left them open the next day and the next. Daylight expected things of me, and I let it expect them, a little at a time. I answered a message. I threw out the wet paper my life had become, the gray pile of it, and underneath there were still a few threads attached to me, frayed but holding, the way roots hold a thing you thought was dead. And I called my mother. She answered on the fourth ring, the way she always does now, coming back from somewhere far away to do it. And when she heard it was me, her voice did a thing I hadn't heard it do in a long time. It came all the way forward, all the way into the phone. No searching, no distance, just there. I said I was sorry it had been so long. I said I'd been somewhere far away and I was back now. I don't think she knew how far I meant, or how close I'd come to a place she could never have called across to, the somewhere she had said no to for me once on a table under a light. Or maybe she did. Mothers know the shape of a thing without needing it laid out, the way she'd carried that cadence out of that room for 28 years without knowing she carried it. She just said, "Oh, sweetheart," in the warm, forward voice, and I closed my eyes in my bright kitchen with the curtains open and let it put me back into the loudest room in the world, the one I'd been pulled into blue and quiet and not breathing, the one she had made loud enough for me when I couldn't make any sound at all. I went to see her that week. I sat by the bed in the soft institutional building and I held her hand, which was warm, ordinarily warm, the warmth of a body that had to work to make it. And I felt how that warmth would not last forever, how it was already thinning, how one day I would sit in that chair and the hand would be cooling under mine and there would be nothing I could say to any door to keep it. And I stayed anyway. That's the whole of what I learned, if it's anything. You stay anyway. You hold the warm hand knowing it will go cold, because the going cold is the price of the warmth having been real, because you cannot keep only the warm parts, because a love you can't lose was never a having in the first place. I had been offered the no loss, and I had said not yet, and the cost of that no was every loss still ahead of me, and I paid it, and I am still paying it, and it is mine. I took the cat home. It let me, the way it had let me carry it down to the boiler that night, riding against my chest with its fast heart slowing as we went. I don't know that you can take a cat like that home so much as agree to share an address with it. And it kept its own counsel, and its notched ear, and its habit of looking at me with one eye before deciding, occasionally, on the second. But it sleeps now on a warm square of blanket by a radiator that I pay for, and it has a saucer that I fill. And on cold nights it folds itself into a loaf against the small of my back and puts its working living heat into me, the heat that costs something. The only kind I trust. I left the night job not long after. I found I didn't need to be the only one awake in a building full of sleeping people anymore. I'd done my listening in the dark, and I'd given the dark its answer, and there was nothing left up that half flight for me to clean. I go back, though, once a year. I won't pretend I don't. On the morning I was born, the same gray hour, late, when the air has that chemical smell of the city deciding to wake, I drive to the hospital where I started, and I go in past the desk where nobody knows me now, and I take the fire stairs, the gray steel ones with the bare bulbs, up past 3 to the half flight that turns into the dark where the bulb is still out, after all these years, because nobody comes to the fire stairs to be reassured. And the door is warm. 1 hour, on that one morning, the cold steel goes to body heat again, to the held hand warmth, to the temperature of the inside of a wrist. And I have stopped trying to explain it, the way I stopped trying to explain all of it, because the explanations were only ever a house of dull facts I built to live in so I wouldn't have to know the true thing. The true thing is that a place was kept for me once, and a part of me knows the anniversary of its own almost. And on that morning the floor remembers, the way a body remembers a wound in cold weather, the way you wake at the hour you used to wake for someone who needed you in the night. I don't put my ear to it anymore. There's nothing to hear. The doves are quiet, the keeper rested, the holding long since let go. I only put my hand to it. I lay my palm flat against the warm wood the way I did the very first night, and I feel it give that warmth up into me, steady and unhurried and asking nothing, and I let it. I let it be warm. I don't pretend it isn't good. I don't make it smaller than it was. And then, kindly, the way you'd speak to something you loved and had to leave and visit only once a year, I tell it the truth, which is the same truth I told it the night I closed it. The only two words that ever held that floor shut, and the only two that keep it shut still. Every year, on the morning I was born, the door is warm again for 1 hour, and I lay my hand flat against it and tell it kindly, not yet. And then I go home, where it is cold and where I am alive.